A woman staring at her phone, refreshing the same screen for the 100th time. A man pacing his apartment, rehearsing what he will say in an argument that hasn't even happened yet. A student sitting with open books, eyes glazed, pretending to study while his mind is tangled in noise. All of them, in different ways, are terrified of the same thing: the empty space, the pause, the void. We've been trained to believe silence means lack, that stillness means failure, that nothingness means we're falling behind. But in physics, nothingness is not absence. The void is the womb, the field, the very fabric from which all matter, all energy, all possibility arises. Quantum mechanics shows us that the vacuum is not truly empty. It's teeming with potential, a sea of probabilities waiting to collapse. Which means the very thing you fear, the gap between where you are and where you want to be, is not a punishment. It is the portal. I used to think manifestation was about filling space, cramming in affirmations, stacking on visualizations, forcing my nervous system to stay positive. But the harder I tried to push into the space, the more it pushed back. It was like trying to sculpt a statue by stuffing clay into the air around it, instead of carving from silence. It wasn't until I studied the observer effect that I realized reality does not respond to clutter. It responds to coherence. The electron doesn't show up in the experiment because the scientists screamed at it. It collapses into form because of a clear, attuned observation, which means creation is not about effort. It's about spaciousness, the ability to sit in the void without immediately filling it with fear. Think about when you're in traffic and the red light holds you. Your instinct is to reach for your phone, to check notifications, to kill the silence. That micro moment is a mirror of your entire life, the inability to let there be nothing. Yet neuroscience reveals something powerful. When you allow the brain to rest, when you stop stuffing it with stimulation, your default mode network activates. That's the system responsible for imagination, insight, and creative breakthroughs. Which means the very pause you're trying to escape is the generator of your next solution. The silence you fear is the intelligence you need. So what if manifestation isn't about doing more, but about undoing the compulsive need to do? What if the void isn't a threat but a teacher? Athletes call it the zone when their movements are effortless, born from a still mind. Musicians call it the rest, the pause between notes that gives music its shape. Nature shows it in winter, when nothing grows, yet underground the soil is preparing for spring. Everywhere we look, creation requires a season of nothingness, and yet we keep trying to bulldoze the gap, afraid of its power. Here's the paradox: the more you run from the void, the louder it chases you. That's why anxiety spirals in the middle of the night. That's why the person who clings to busyness always feels secretly hollow. Because the void is knocking, not to destroy you, but to invite you into alignment. Your nervous system is not built to be on all the time. Regulation comes from expansion and contraction, tension and release. Without pause, there's no reset. Without void, there's no birth. If this is clicking for you, drop one word in the comments, the quality you're choosing to embody in the empty spaces this week. Because here's the truth. Your transmission signal is not what you're saying, not what you're forcing, but what you're embodying when you are still. The body broadcasts coherence not in the effort, but in the surrender. The heart's electromagnetic field synchronizes with the brain when you breathe into silence. That's not poetry. That's measurable biology. Coherence happens in the gap. So next time you find yourself in the discomfort of waiting for the message, the money, the miracle, instead of scrambling to fill the silence, dare to feel the void. That's where the probability waves hover, waiting for a coherent signal to collapse. That's where the nervous system learns safety without needing external proof. That's where your identity shifts from the one chasing to the one becoming. Not by force, by frequency, not by noise, by nothingness. And it's in this emptiness that everything begins. The mistake most of us make is thinking the void is passive. We imagine it as blank space, like an empty room where nothing happens until we decorate it. But physics and biology both tell a different story. The void is not passive, it's charged. Think of the quantum vacuum. Even in its emptiest state, It seethes with fluctuations, virtual particles flashing in and out of existence faster than the blink of an eye. This isn't some abstract theory, it's the foundation of everything you touch, taste, and see. Your chair, your breath, your very body emerge from what appears to be nothing, which means that when you sit in silence, when you stop filling the space with frantic thought, you are not in absence. You are in the field of maximum possibility. Neuroscience mirrors this truth. Studies of meditation and mindfulness show that when the brain slips into states of stillness, gamma waves spike. Gamma waves are associated with integration, insight, and whole brain coherence. In other words, when you stop stuffing the void with mental noise, your brain actually becomes more synchronized, more powerful. Yet, society conditions us to run from it, to scroll, to snack, to self-distract. Like the young woman endlessly checking her notifications, not because she expects anything new, but because she's terrified of facing nothing. Or the man who refreshes his bank app every hour, as if staring at the numbers will force them to grow. These behaviors are not about information, they are about escape. Escape from the void that quietly whispers, "You are safe, even here." And this is the crux of manifestation. The reason so many affirmations, visualizations, and rituals feel hollow is not because they're wrong, but because they're layered on top of resistance. Imagine trying to grow a seed in soil that's never been cleared. The weeds of panic, impatience, and fear choke out the very thing you're trying to cultivate. The void is the soil, the clearing. Without it, your efforts are scattered. With it, they collapse probability into form, which means learning to sit in the void is not a luxury but the prerequisite. Athletes describe it as flow. They don't force the play, they drop into the gap where instinct takes over. Artists describe it as being taken by the muse. The brush moves as if guided by something larger. Lovers feel it in silence, lying side by side, when nothing is said yet everything is known. The void is not lack, it is intimacy with the field. It is the coherence that lets reality meet you without distortion. But here's the paradox you must digest. Control is the opposite of coherence. The more you try to manipulate the void, the more resistance you introduce. Physics calls it interference. Psychology calls it anxiety. Your nervous system interprets control as danger, which creates incoherence in your signal. This is why surrender is not laziness, but precision. It is alignment with the way creation actually works. So when you next find yourself tempted to fill the gap, reaching for your phone in the elevator, replaying an argument in your head while waiting for the bus, forcing affirmations at midnight, pause. Notice that reflex. That's the exact doorway. The impulse to escape nothingness is the moment where everything could change. If you dare to stay, to breathe, to feel the discomfort, you are stepping into coherence. And coherence is what collapses the wave. Not by chasing, by becoming. Not by stuffing, by emptying. The void is not your enemy, it is your access point. And the more you can let yourself rest there, the faster reality begins to crystallize around you in ways your mind could never strategize. What makes this so difficult is that your biology is wired for survival, not for surrender. The nervous system has one primary job: detect threat, which means emptiness, silence, and waiting can feel like danger because the body interprets stillness as vulnerability. That's why people start fidgeting in an elevator or compulsively check the clock in a waiting room. The body screams, "Do something, fill the space." But the paradox is that this very instinct, designed to keep you safe, is what keeps you misaligned. Because in the quantum field, noise equals distortion, and distortion prevents collapse. Think of a laboratory experiment with lasers. If the beams are incoherent, scattering in different directions, they produce chaos. But when they are coherent, phase-locked, aligned in rhythm, they cut through steel. Your nervous system works the same way. When it's fragmented by stress, doubt, or the compulsive need to fill silence, your signal is scattered. But when it's regulated, coherent, and still, your signal becomes precise. That precision is what collapses probabilities into tangible reality. This is why embodiment matters so much. Because manifestation isn't about what you think, it's about what your body broadcasts. Your thoughts can say, "I trust," while your pulse races and your breath shortens. The field does not listen to words, it listens to coherence, which means the path to creation is not forcing a new thought, but training your nervous system to feel safe in the void, to expand into nothingness without panic. That's when the signal changes. Picture someone waiting for a message from someone they love. They keep staring at their phone, refreshing, spiraling in anxiety. That state is not neutral, it's a broadcast. Every microsecond, their body is radiating incoherence, signaling, "I am unsafe until this arrives," and reality mirrors it back. But contrast that with the person who breathes into the space, who lets the silence be alive, who leans into trust. Their body radiates coherence. They're no longer transmitting lack, they're transmitting readiness. That's what collapses timelines, not by force, by frequency. Neuroscience confirms this. Heart-brain coherence studies show that when the heart rhythm synchronizes with the brain's waves, the entire body enters a state of resonance. In that state, perception shifts, solutions emerge, intuition heightens. Which means the doorway to collapsing probability isn't external proof, it's internal regulation. You don't wait for reality to calm you, you calm yourself, and reality bends. And yet, here's the challenge. Surrender is not a one-time act, it's a practice. Each gap in your day, the traffic jam, the waiting line, the blank page, is an initiation. Each void asks, will you resist me or will you receive me? Every time you choose to breathe into silence instead of escaping it, you deepen your coherence. You become the clear observer the universe can actually respond to. So next time you're caught in the pull of impatience, remind yourself, this is the experiment. The void is not nothing happening. The void is everything gathering. It is the quantum field vibrating with infinite potential, waiting for a coherent signal. You don't need to force it. You need to align with it. And alignment is always closer than you think. It's in the breath you've been holding back. It's in the pause you've been resisting. It's in the silence you've been afraid to enter. Because that silence is not the absence of creation. It is the womb of creation itself. There's a moment every creator, every dreamer, every human faces, the confrontation with emptiness. You finish the project and then nothing. You send the message and then nothing. You take the leap, and instead of an immediate answer, there's just space. And in that space, most people collapse. They interpret silence as rejection, delay as failure, emptiness as proof that nothing is working. But what if the silence is not absence, but gestation? What if the pause is not punishment, but proof that the field is aligning? Physics already tells us this. Before a particle appears in measurable form, it exists as a wave of infinite probabilities. That wave doesn't collapse instantly just because you want it to. It collapses when observation reaches coherence, which means reality is not late. It's calibrating. The void is the exact interval where potential takes shape. Your job is not to panic, not to rush, not to claw at the silence. Your job is to stay coherent long enough for the collapse to occur. Neuroscience offers the same lesson. When a person learns something new, the brain doesn't rewire instantly. Synaptic plasticity takes time. Neurons fire together repeatedly until eventually they wire together. That in-between, where the old pattern is dissolving but the new one hasn't yet stabilized, feels like nothingness. But it's not nothing. It's the invisible rewiring that makes the visible transformation inevitable. The same is true in manifestation. The void is the neuroplastic gap where identity shifts before reality reflects it. Consider the student waiting for exam results. In the waiting, his nervous system spins out scenarios. What if I failed? What if I disappointed everyone? His body tightens, his breath shortens, his imagination becomes a factory of fear. Yet the results don't change in that moment. What changes is his frequency. He is broadcasting incoherence into the field. Contrast that with the student who learns to sit with the not knowing, who uses the pause to breathe, to regulate, to remember his worth, is not hinged on a number. That student is coherent in the void, and coherence always magnetizes more aligned outcomes than panic ever could. The void, then, is not the enemy. It is the training ground. It's where you practice being who you claim you want to be, before life hands you the evidence. It's where you embody abundance before the money, love before the partner, peace before the resolution. It's where you stop outsourcing your regulation to external proof and start generating it from within. Because only then does the field have no choice but to mirror it back. But most people don't realize this because they've been conditioned to equate emptiness with danger. In a culture addicted to stimulation, silence feels unbearable. That's why people scroll endlessly, replay conversations in their heads, or force affirmations like a broken record. Anything to avoid the pause. Yet it's in the pause where alignment is forged. Not in the noise, not in the effort, but in the emptiness. If this is landing, take a second and drop one word in the comments. The quality you want to carry into your empty spaces this week. Maybe it's trust. Maybe it's stillness. Maybe it's surrender. By naming it, you begin transmitting it. Because the truth is, nothingness is not your weakness. It is your power. The void is the amplifier. The empty room is not mocking you. It is listening, waiting, holding. And the more you dare to sit in it without collapsing, the more it collapses in your favor. Not by control, by coherence, not by effort, by embodiment. The void is not the absence of everything you want. It is the birthplace of all of it. Most people think they're afraid of failure, but underneath what they're really afraid of is the pause before success, the silence before the answer arrives, the gap before form appears. That empty stretch feels unbearable because the mind whispers, maybe nothing's coming. Maybe I've been abandoned. Yet in physics, this gap is everything. It's called the quantum vacuum, and far from being empty, it's a field so alive that all particles, all forces, all realities surge from it. What you call nothing is the most potent something that exists. The tragedy is that we keep fleeing it. Someone sits alone on a Sunday, and instead of sinking into the spaciousness, they blast the TV, scroll endlessly, snack without hunger, anything to outrun the silence. Someone gets ghosted after a date, and instead of breathing through the gap, they spiral into frantic stories. Someone applies for a job and in the waiting, floods their body with panic as if panic itself could push the answer faster. But here's the truth. In every one of those examples, the void wasn't withholding. The void was gestating, and panic was the only interference. Neuroscience shows that when you resist emptiness, your amygdala, the brain's fear center, hijacks your signal. Cortisol floods your system. Your heart rhythm becomes erratic, your breath shallow, your electromagnetic field chaotic. In that state, your body is literally broadcasting incoherence, which means the field receives scrambled input. That's why waiting in fear seems to stretch time, while waiting in coherence makes solutions and synchronicities arrive with ease. It's not imagination, it's measurable biology and physics working in tandem. This is why the ancients spoke of the fertile void. They intuited what modern science now confirms. Emptiness is not lack, it is latency. Like the dark soil before the sprout, like the silence before the symphony, like the starless night before the dawn. Without the void, nothing can take shape. Which means manifestation isn't just about learning to tolerate emptiness, it's about learning to celebrate it. To see the pause not as a wall, but as the womb. Imagine this. You're sitting in a theater before the play begins. The lights dim. The stage is empty. Everyone holds their breath. In that suspended silence, anticipation thickens the air. The actors aren't late. The story isn't missing. The void is preparing the reveal. That is the posture of manifestation. Not tapping your foot impatiently, but leaning in, present, coherent, ready to receive. And here's the paradox that flips everything. The moment you stop demanding that the void resolve instantly, the field accelerates. Why? Because coherence collapses probability. Panic stretches it. Your body, your breath, your heart rhythm are not waiting passively. They are instruments playing into the field. The music of coherence collapses form. The noise of desperation scatters it. So the next time you feel the discomfort of nothingness, remember, the void is not asking you to prove anything. It's asking you to relax into resonance, to breathe until your body trusts that emptiness is not danger, but design. That is embodiment. That is manifestation, not by chasing, by becoming. not by filling, by emptying, not by noise, by silence. Because in the end, the void is not the absence of your dream. It is the echo chamber where your signal gets amplified, clarified, and finally returned as reality. Embrace the empty space, because it is already holding everything you've asked for. There's a reason monks, mystics, and even elite athletes train in silence. It's not because silence is holy, or because emptiness is some mystical escape from life. It's because they understand a fundamental truth. The void sharpens reality. When you strip away the noise, what remains is signal. When you allow yourself to stop filling the gaps with fear, you discover that emptiness isn't empty. It's precise. It's the calibration chamber where your frequency becomes clear enough to move matter. In physics, this principle is visible in interference patterns. When waves collide out of sync, they cancel each other, creating chaos and static. But when they meet in harmony, they amplify, creating a stronger, clearer wave. Your thoughts, your emotions, your embodied state are waves. When they're scattered, part of you hopeful, part of you terrified, part of you doubting, the field receives noise, nothing collapses. But when they synchronize in stillness, in presence, in coherence, the void amplifies them into form. The problem is, most of us are terrified of that amplification. Take the man rehearsing arguments in his head on the subway. He fills the silence with imaginary battles, scattering his frequency. Take the woman refreshing her inbox every 5 minutes, unable to let there be a pause between sending and receiving. Take the friend who drowns her apartment in background noise just to avoid hearing her own breath. In all of these scenarios, emptiness was the invitation, but instead of stepping into it, they escaped it and scattered their power in the process. Neuroscience reveals why. The nervous system equates unfamiliar stillness with vulnerability. That's why your skin crawls when you sit in a quiet room with no distractions. That's why the waiting feels unbearable. But here's the breakthrough. When you learn to regulate your body in that very moment, you rewire your survival system. You teach your nervous system that emptiness is not threat, it's safety. And once your body knows safety in the void, your signal shifts permanently. That's when manifestation stops being trying and becomes transmitting. Think of an orchestra tuning before the concert begins. At first, there's noise, scattered sounds, random frequencies, everyone playing at once. But then, there's a pause, silence. The conductor lifts the baton. Out of that void, harmony emerges. That silence wasn't absence, it was alignment. That's your life. Every pause before your next chapter is not a delay, but a tuning. The void is the baton being lifted. If this is resonating with you, write one word in the comments. The state you want to practice inside your empty spaces this week. Because the more you name it, the more your body begins to embody it. And embodiment is the only signal the field truly receives. Here's the liberating truth. The void is not asking you to wait passively. It's asking you to tune, to let the static burn out, to let your nervous system breathe, to let your frequency become clear. Because when your frequency is clear, collapse is inevitable. The field doesn't need convincing, it needs coherence. So the next time you catch yourself scrambling to fill a pause, remember, that pause is the power. That silence is the signal. The void is not holding you back. It's holding you steady until you are coherent enough to receive what you've asked for. Not by force, by frequency, not by panic, by presence, not by filling, by tuning. And in that tuning, everything you thought was missing finds its way to you, through the very space you once feared. What if the thing you've been chasing isn't ahead of you, but already surrounding you, waiting for you to stop running? That's the paradox of the void. You think it's a gap between where you are and where you want to be, but in truth, it is the very medium carrying you there. Like the still air that allows sound to travel, or the dark sky that lets stars shine, emptiness is not a barrier. It's the backdrop that makes creation possible. Quantum physics proves this in startling ways. The so-called vacuum of space, what scientists once thought was nothing, is overflowing with energy. Particles flicker into existence and vanish in fractions of a second, a constant dance of potential. If that's what's happening in the vastness of the cosmos, imagine what's happening in the microcosm of your own life. The silence between your thoughts, The pause between breaths, the empty moments you rush to avoid, those are the very places where reality is being written. But because the nervous system hates uncertainty, you've been conditioned to fear that writing. Think about waiting for test results, or a text that could change everything, or money to finally arrive. The pause swells, the mind spins stories, the body contracts. Suddenly the silence feels suffocating. Yet nothing external has shifted, only your interpretation of the void. You turned gestation into rejection. You turned potential into panic. And in doing so, you scattered your own signal. Here's the deeper truth: the void does not withhold, it reflects. If you meet it with anxiety, it magnifies anxiety. If you meet it with coherence, it magnifies coherence. That's why people who learn to befriend emptiness start experiencing synchronicities, insights, breakthroughs out of nowhere. It's not luck. It's the field amplifying their signal. Their willingness to stay embodied in nothingness gives the void room to respond. Think of an archer drawing a bow. The arrow does not fly because he rushes. It flies because he holds the tension, breath steady, body aligned, waiting for the right release. The power is in the pause before the action. The same is true for you. Manifestation doesn't come from flinging thoughts wildly at the universe. It comes from inhabiting the void with such coherence that when release comes, the trajectory is inevitable. Neuroscience gives us another layer. When you can rest in emptiness without panic, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that governs clarity and decision-making, stays online. When you can't, your amygdala hijacks the system, pulling you into fight or flight. Which means every time you choose to breathe into the void, instead of fleeing it, you're literally rewiring your brain to stay coherent in uncertainty. That's neuroplasticity in action. That's identity shifting at the cellular level. If this is landing, drop one word in the comments, the frequency you're choosing to practice in the pauses of your life. By declaring it, you anchor it, and by anchoring it, you broadcast it. Because here's the resonance you must remember. The void is not the end of the story. It's the stage being set. It's not absence, it's alignment. Not silence, but signal. And when you stop resisting it, you realize that nothingness has been carrying everything all along. There's a subtle shift that happens when you finally stop treating the void as an enemy. At first, it feels like loss. The loss of control, of certainty, of constant stimulation. But then something extraordinary happens. The emptiness begins to feel alive. You notice details you missed before, the sound of your own breath, the way your body softens when you let go, the clarity that rises unforced when you no longer demand answers. The void stops feeling like nothing and starts feeling like everything. This is where embodiment becomes non-negotiable, because you cannot think your way through the void. You have to feel your way. The mind wants to fill the silence, to label it, to fix it, but the body can rest in it if you let it. Slow your breath, soften your jaw, relax your chest. In that instant, your electromagnetic field reorganizes. Heart and brain fall into rhythm. The noise quiets, coherence blooms, and in coherence, the void transforms from chaos into canvas. Think about when you're lying awake at night, replaying a breakup. The silence feels crushing, like an emptiness that might swallow you. But if you dare to lean into it, breathe through it, you discover that under the ache there is space. And in that space, perspective begins to arrive. Or consider the job seeker after sending out dozens of applications. The inbox is silent. The mind screams failure. But if he lets himself trust the void instead of fearing it, he realizes that this silence is fertile. Networking connections are forming unseen. Opportunities are aligning. Timelines are collapsing. The void isn't mocking him. It's rearranging reality on his behalf. This is the real power. To meet nothingness with presence. To stop making the pause mean rejection, and instead let it mean preparation. Every master of creation, from artists to scientists to spiritual sages, has learned to lean into this truth. The breakthroughs, the discoveries, the revelations never came from endless effort. They came from the space that effort left behind. The shower thought, the morning walk, the silent meditation. The void delivered what striving could not. So here's the closing transmission. The void is not a punishment for being unworthy. It's the very sign that the field is alive in your life. Nothingness is not your enemy. It is your invitation to breathe, to regulate, to embody the frequency you want before the evidence arrives, to let silence do the work your mind cannot. And if you've felt that resonance while listening, then this space between us has already proven the point. Out of nothing, something real has emerged, a shift, a clarity, a coherence. That's the void at work. So if you're ready to keep exploring how science and spirit meet, hit subscribe and join this community of coherence. Because together, we're not just filling space, we're embracing it. Not by chasing, by becoming, not by effort, by alignment, not by fear, by the fertile power of the void itself.